Grand Rising. Grand Rising. Hope everyone's doing well.
Peace, everybody. Grand Rising, Grand Rising.
Welcome. David Corey, what's going on, bro? Give us a one if you can hear us. Uh-oh. Just saw something in the background I need to fix. There we go. Grand Rising Pamela Hall. Grand Rising LJ Free. Glad y'all was able to make it out this Friday Rising. We're gonna let some more people come on in before we get started. Hope y'all got your hard hats on. Got your pickaxes. It's about to get very, very deep. Just think about this. We only touched on one paragraph from the timeline. And we went almost 3 hours. Well, content-wise, we went 2.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just off of one paragraph. So, David Corey said, trying to secure the bag. It's Friday. Oh, I understand. Definitely understand. Definitely understand. So what's going on? No Salah, how you doing, bro?
You talking to me?
Yes, sir, I am.
I'm sorry, my son was distracting me. What'd you say now?
I said, how are you doing?
Grand Rising, y'all. Good peace, y'all. Peace. What's going on? I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
Okay.
It's fine. Friday.
Look, is that Nemo you talking to?
Yep.
What up, Nemo?
He talking to me pretty much.
Shout out to Nemo.
But yeah, everything is well.
That's good. Man, this week went by super fast. Super fast. Glad to see. I hope everybody has some great things planned for this weekend. Get out and enjoy the family, the relatives. You know, go visit some sites. Just enjoy each other. I don't know why that keeps showing up like that. I probably need to do another transition because it's I don't like that. Let's see something. Yeah, I gotta forgive me. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and the screen is not doing exactly what I wanted to do. So I keep messing with it. Hopefully, I'm not messing it up. What's going on, Bones? He's sending out the alerts to the show so people can get on and come on in here. You see, look, don't sound like the one time that I stay on time with the music and end the music. Everybody ain't got in yet. Oh, he left. Guess he'll be back. Who is it? Oh. Reese said, what it do, no?
Peace, free. Peace. What's going on?
So we're going to continue with the timeline for the civil rights. But before we do that, let's try something right quick. Hopefully, let's see if this works. See if it let me do it. And boom. There you go. See, Bounds, you the man. So we're going to go ahead and do our public service announcement. What you see on the screen is our website, attacklessassembly.com, where the real work gets done. And it's basically the gathering of the minds that do the work. So, who are we? We are Autochthonous Assembly, which is a non-profit organization dedicated to raising up indigenous American voices by using genealogy, also known as family history, which is a study of families and the tracing of their lineage and history. Genealogists use oral interviews, historical records, genetic analysis, and other records to obtain information about a family and to demonstrate kinship and pedigree of its members. We also have core values, and those core values are the foundations of our company, essential to our success, and serve as a lens through which we evaluate every business decision. Those core values are, but are not limited to, integrity, which is knowing and doing what is right, respect, treating others the way you want to be treated, responsibility, embrace opportunities to contribute, and servant leadership. And as you are aware, Autochthonous Assembly, our main goal as far as activity is to make sure we help you find your tribe by doing your lineage, regardless of what your tribe affiliation is or what you want it to be. We will help you. Also help you get your family, relatives, community, and your tribe to become self-sufficient if you so choose. We're not here to tell you who you are not or who you are. We're not here to do any of that. We're just here to make sure that we help you get back to your tribe. Everything else, we stay out of. And with that being said, I want to relinquish to Bones and No Sellout. Make sure I didn't miss anything. So, is there anything I missed, guys? Left out?
Right on time with it. Peace to the chat.
Cool. Rising Doodoo. Grand Rising Pamela Hall. Grand Rising You Don't Want It. That's it for now. So we're good to go. And I know I shouldn't have to say it, but I'm gonna say it. You know you got an open invitation to come on the panel. Doodoo. So get on up in here, sir. Because we're definitely touching on the Board of Education today. And I know that being one of your many various backgrounds, which you have a lot of knowledge and can share information on, we're going to go into Brown versus the Board of Education. So we're going to be needing that insight of yours. He said Doodoo Brown versus the Board of Education. Alright, I like that one. See, everybody waiting on you. So, are you ready? Come on in. So, no sellout. You ready? You ready to do this? I'm gonna put the link in the back chat. Excuse me, in the chat. Sorry. Way y'all can keep up, go back and do your research, make sure we're on point and on track as we learn and get exposed to this information together. If there's something that we miss or we need to cover or expound upon, please do not hesitate to ask or let us know. Also be mindful that this is information coming from the Encyclopedia Britannica, so I'm sure the sources are listed somewhere. I think they're at the bottom of the page. Hold on, let me check. No, they're not. But it does give you the information of encyclopedia, so you can actually do the research, confirm the information, make sure it's correct. Let's get ready. Give me a second. Grand Rising Oak Cliff. I don't know why I take the K. Excuse me. Oak Cliff. Grand Rising. Just stop being lazy. Alright. So we're about to get it in, y'all. So remember we talked about the Board of Education yesterday, or we mentioned it. And there were a lot of individuals that were instrumental in things getting done. Give me a second, I need to go pull that up. I want to do it before we go to the Rosa Parks and Montgomery bus boycott, because there's a lot with this Brown versus Board of Education that we need to cover. Because as you know, May 17, 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the case of Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. Remember, it said the decision effectively overturned the separate but equal ruling of Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, which had allowed Jim Crow laws that mandated separate public facilities for whites and African Americans to prevail. Remember, we said watch the hijack with the African Americans. for the first half of the century. It says while the Brown rule applied only to schools, it implied desegregation in other public facilities. And so then we went on to look at the ruling, or the Jason Johnson Great Society, and it spoke about not only civil rights movement, but it spoke about voluntary efforts of various groups and the nonprofits in the 1954 Supreme Court, where it ruled segregation unconstitutional. It says this civil rights victory led to further efforts to challenge segregation in southern states. African American college students began to use a stay-in strategy to desegregate lunch counters in stores across the South, refusing to leave their seats until served or jailed. 28 in 1961, 11 youth calling themselves Freedom Riders began a protest of segregated bus stations and other discriminatory interstate travel laws. Now, this is information that's coming from the Social Welfare Library, so I'll put that link in as well.
Also made a movie about it.
Oh, they did? What was the name of the movie? Do you remember?
Freedom Riders.
Duh, okay. So y'all know I'm not the movie buff guy. So where am I? Okay, it says then in 1963, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, headed by King and Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights, led campaign protests segregation in Birmingham, Alabama, the largest industrial city in the South. King's coalition used nonviolent strategy, employing peaceful mass marches, sit-ins, and business boycotts to achieve their objectives. His advocacy effort attracted media attention nationwide, indeed worldwide, forcing the cooperation of the federal government in enforcing mulatto, Negro, Black civil rights. So we looked at one of the organizations that he was the head of, but he didn't start. So there are two other organizations that were instrumental. Oh, Cliff says, please share the video. Okay, I will.
Mike, check, come back.
Give me a second, I'll share. Alright, so y'all should see my screen now. You said you meant us in the chat, but thanks. I'll share my screen from this part anyway. Hopefully, give me a second, I'll make it bigger. So, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was headed by King, and then you have the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights, right? One is a conference, and the other one is a movement for human rights. Which one do y'all think is a nonprofit? Take a guess. Let's see. Premises all over. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the link in the chat. Now, this is from Wikipedia. The question was, one of them was a conference and one of them was a movement. I mean, one of them was an organization. And I asked which one was which. The Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights is an organization. And what we know is that if you want to find out, especially on Wikipedia, you want to find the sources or the organizations that's also associated with them, all we have to do is just scroll to the bottom. Got the references. Now this one didn't have any organizations that were associated with them. They'll probably mention them. That does talk about the Freedom Riders. They also have a Declaration of Principles. So let's look at who started this. Okay? David said, I'm gonna make him get some reading glasses. Well, I ain't gonna stay on it too long. I just wanted to highlight this part. I know many of y'all are looking at your phones. But it reads, the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights, ACMHR, was a civil rights organization in Birmingham, Alabama, which coordinated boycotts and sponsored federal lawsuits aimed at dismantling segregation in Birmingham during the civil rights movement. Fred Shuttleworth, pastor of Bethel Baptist Church, served as president of the group from its founding in 1956 until 1969. The ACMHR's crowning movement came during the pivotal Birmingham campaign, which it coordinated along with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference during the spring of 1963. So it was founded by Shuttleworth. They said he was a fiery pastor who took over the pulpit of Bethel Baptist Church in 1953. He was already a leading figure in the Birmingham movement. He had led an unsuccessful campaign to convince the Birmingham Police Department to hire black officers and accompanied Arthurine Lucy and Arthur Shores in the short-lived integration of the University of Alabama. He was membership chairman for the Alabama chapter of the National Association of Advancement of Colored People and was the featured speaker in January 1956 Emancipation Rally sponsored by the NAACP. Okay, I would stop screen sharing. But the thing that I wanted y'all to focus on or pay attention to is that Shuttlesworth was the president of this organization, but he also sat on the NAACP board. And the NAACP met on June 4th, 1956 and drafted a 7-point Declaration of Principles, which is basically equivalent to Articles of Incorporation or bylaws, basically telling you what they stand for and what they represent and how they're going to be ran, which is nothing more than how you set up some of your governance for your nonprofit entities. So we were doing this even in the 50s, just so you know. It's one of them situations where, we can show you better than we can tell you. Just a thought. So he was part of the NAACP, and he worked. It says as a result, Shuttlesworth led a group of 11 pastors and laymen who met at A.G. Gaston Smith and Gaston Funeral Chapel. Outlined the creation of the group of Freedom Independent Citizens of the United States of America and of the state of Alabama. So think about this. They met at basically they met at a funeral chapel to outline the creation of the group. Now, what do we know about funeral homes and burial sites? They're nonprofit.
501.
Exactly. They're 501s. So these individuals had many 501c3s. They were using them then. And it seems like they were using them more than, I dare say, the European counterparts.
I could agree with you on that.
Grand Rising Original Teller. So while they were at this nonprofit meeting, while they were at this nonprofit business, having a meeting to create another nonprofit, or actually two, Free and Independent Citizens of the United States of America. That is a long title. Let's see what the Free Independent Citizens of the United States of America were about, shall we?
The Fayals. I don't know. I can't break that down. They could have picked something different.
It's interesting. I'm not coming up with anything right as of yet. Give me a second. Grand Rising, Jeffrida. It is not coming up. That's interesting. Y'all are funny. Free said it like the last line of Free said it like the last line of a vision test. And David, that's the reason why we always do timelines and try to tie things in, because people look at things as separate. These 501c's have been in existence for a while, and we were using them quite heavy. So, yeah.
Oh, seems like y'all got to the part of Levi, huh?
Say what?
No, I'm talking about Levi 501 series.
Oh. So they formed the Free and Independent Citizens of the United States of America and of the state of Alabama, who would express explicitly our determination to press forward persistently for freedom and democracy. So this is a declaration of principles, right? So now it goes on and talks about the busty segregation. So we're still on the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. I'll go ahead and put that link back in for those who are just tuning in. is on Wikipedia, and it's basically showing, or we're highlighting how Negroes, mulattoes, blacks were using nonprofits to organize back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So for those people that are trying to propagate that nonprofits are somebody else's stuff, that's not true. Okay, so it says initially the ACMHR continued the NAACP's tactics of filing lawsuits challenging enforcement of the city's segregation laws, and also modeled itself on a Montgomery Improvement Association attempting to organize Negro citizens for boycotts and peaceful demonstrations. Two small actions preceded the AMHR's first mass demonstration. Two members had applied to take the civil... Say again?
What type of citizens they said again? I didn't mean to cut you off. I thought I heard them say Negro citizen.
I said Negro because they said they put in African American.
Oh, ew.
Yeah. I'll clarify next time that it's a, they stealing or replacing factual information. So it says two small actions preceded the ACMHR's first mass demonstration. The first one was when two members applied to take the civil service exam in an attempt to become police officers, but were refused by the city's personnel board. The ACMHR sponsored a lawsuit against the board. So I'm going to say that again. I don't know if y'all caught it. It said the ACMHR sponsored a lawsuit against the board. What is that?
Nonprofit.
Exactly. So that means the nonprofit filed the lawsuit on the individual's behalf, and they didn't have to come out their pocket.
Tax exempt.
Okay. On December 22nd, 1956, Carl and Alexander Baldwin tested the Birmingham Terminal Station's compliance with the Interstate Commerce Commission ruling banning segregation among interstate passengers. They were arrested and a lawsuit was filed. This was in 1956. Okay, so they were arrested and a lawsuit was filed. So they was arrested, released. The first large public action undertaken by ACMHR was aimed at the city's segregation bus service after Broader versus Gale. The decision that ended segregation on Montgomery buses was upheld on November 13th. ACHMR leaders petitioned the city to repeal the ordinances requiring segregated buses in Birmingham. When the city refused, Shuttlesworth organized a display of peaceful civil disobedience in which hundreds of, they say African Americans, but it was hundreds of Negroes, mulattoes, and blacks to boarded buses and sat in whites-only seats. On December 25th, 1956, the night before the protests, Shuttleworth's house was bombed, blasting him into the basement where he landed still on his mattress. The fact that he emerged relatively unscathed left Shuttleworth convinced that he was ordained to lead and contributed to his attitude of fearlessness. The demonstration went on as planned and resulted in 22 arrests, which in turn triggered ACMHR lawsuit asking for an injunction. So you're looking at about 4 lawsuits already. In February 1957, the ACMHR assigned on as a charter member organizing the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Shuttleworth was named secretary of the SCLC. The next month, he and his wife, Ruby, again challenged the segregation waiting rooms at Terminal Station. The couple were able to board their train without incident, but Lamar Weaver, a white man who had greeted them was met by a violent mob outside the station where he tried to leave. So, segregation, school segregation. On September 9th, 1957, just a week after black students were escorted by police in Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, Shuttlesworth attempted to enroll two of his daughters at J.H. Phillips High School and was met by a mob armed with bats and bicycle chains. Hospitalized but undaunted, he left University Hospital to attend a mass meeting that night, embodying his message of nonviolence and faith. He pledged to continue the attempts until the schools were successfully integrated and initiated lawsuits against the city's Board of Education. That would be the 5th lawsuit. By 1958, at least 55 movement churches were active in the ACMHR, weekly mass meetings filled with emotional testimony, music, and passionate preaching, raised an average of about $200 to $300 per week to fund the organization's lawsuits. Additional funds came from speaking engagements in other cities and from local supporters who did not join the group, including whites who were eager to change but could not risk certain retaliation for showing public support for the movement. In its first 3 years, the group spent over $40,000 of the $53,000 raised on legal fees, much of it on black attorneys such as Arthur Shores, Ozell Billingsley Jr., Oscar Adams, and Demetrius Newton of Birmingham, and Eastern and Ernest D. Jackson of Jacksonville, Florida. By 1965, the OCMH had initiated more federal suits that reached the United States Supreme Court than any other petitioner. As the cases rose through the federal court system, they garnered assistance from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. So, in 1 year, no, it says in 3 years, the group spent over $40,000 on legal fees. And this was money that they was raising from their own community with some support from some of the whites.
But have you noticed this dude is MLK before MLK?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Could this be the reason for the name change and who they had him replace? I'm just throwing it out there.
Say it again.
Could this be the reason his name was changed to Martin and who he was replaced in?
Looks that way. James said, "You mean these colors went to law school? Patsy Cline mink coat didn't know this?" Well, the colors could have go, but apparently she couldn't.
Even when you're reading the stories, you know something of how you get all these attorneys for so-called colored people.
Mm-hmm. And apparently, the bar that they took was recognized, or they wouldn't be able to take it to the Supreme Court.
They passed the bar. Let's just remember, they passed the bar.
Not only did they pass the bar, but attorneys generally they have bars based off of their state. When you're dealing with federal cases, that's something different. So when you go to the Supreme Court, it's federal. That's something totally different. I don't know exactly what that entails, but yeah, that's a federal case versus a state case.
But think about it. The way they teach you history, you would think that we couldn't even talk to a federal judge in a federal court as a lawyer.
I know, right? Well, somebody was doing it for us.
But they quick to lead you to believe.
Mm-hmm. So it says, organized opponents of integration included the Ku Klux Klan and the National States Rights Party, threatened and intimidated movement supporters and conducted numerous bombings of churches and residences. Most of those terrorist acts were never prosecuted, and their perpetrators acted with impunity, if not complicity, from city officials and police. In addition, white citizens who appeared uncommitted to segregation were terrorized by extremists. In the face of these challenges, the ACHMR increased its membership, stirred at the meeting by the movement choir founded in July 1960 and directed by Carlton Reese. A group of volunteer guards stood watch at movement churches and pastors' homes and escorted Shuttlesworth and other leaders to appointments. Detectives from the Birmingham Police Department recorded the proceedings at most movement meetings. According to Colonel Stone Johnson, Commissioner Bull Connor would transfer officers from the assignment once they started to get religion. So here's something that you don't hear about. We understood that their movement was nonviolent, but they had guards. People volunteered to guard them. So let me ask you this question. If I'm guarding you, what do you think I'm guarding you with? A stick? A rock?
A whistle and a flashlight.
That means they were also carrying weapons. So, and it goes back to what Doodle Vision said yesterday. Don't think that the Ku Klux Klan were just scaring these people and there was no retort. They was getting hemmed up too. Because think about this. If they were as bad or as they had as much impunity as people claim, why when they marched through our neighborhoods, they had to be guarded by the police? Remember, they had the right to peacefully march, but they were guarded just in case somebody wanted to start something. If we was such and such fear of the Ku Klux Klan, why would they need guards to march through our neighborhoods? Because they would get their brakes beat off of them.
Even to this day, 2019, they need police escorts to march. Don't forget.
So don't get it twisted. Just wanted to put that out there. In 1961, the ACMHR helped organize the Alabama leg of that summer's Freedom Rise, sponsored by Congress for Radical Equality. The demonstrations ended with marked violence as one bus was firebombed in Anniston and another was met by an organized mob at the Birmingham Trailway Station with no police in sight. ACHMHR volunteers took injured riders to the hospital and kept them in their homes until rides would be secured to safety. Oak Cliff says like they did when they came to South Dacres. South Dallas, okay. LJ Free says all these amendments, when all the Supreme Court had to do was rule to enforce the law be upheld and honored by those who were hating on the Indians. Well, who were those laws for? Again, we gotta remember that. Certain laws were amended because we weren't included because they weren't talking about us. Patrick Gabriel says Grand Rising Clan outfit stolen from the Moors in Spain called Brotherhood of Seville. Exactly, Free. They had an agenda to corral us into becoming citizens. Oh, Patrick Gabriel said the clan outfits were stolen from Moors in Spain called Brotherhood of Seville. Mm-hmm. So, the Freedom Rides were sponsored by Congress of Radical Equality. So let's look at how these nonprofits work together. So let's look at the Freedom Rides or the Freedom Riders. civil rights activists rode interstate buses into segregated southern states. And this is the Freedom Riders. Bones is crazy. He said, where were all these Africans doing this desegregation organizing? That's a good question. It said Freedom Riders were civil rights activists who rode interstate buses into segregated southern United States in 1961 and subsequent years to challenge the non-enforcement of the United States Supreme Court decision of Morgan versus Virginia and Bown versus Virginia, which ruled that segregated public buses were unconstitutional. The southern states had ignored the rulings and the federal government did not enforce them. The first Freedom Ride left Washington, D.C. on May 4th, 1961 and was scheduled to arrive in New Orleans on May 17th. So here's the first question we got to ask. The interstate buses, were they publicly owned or were they privately owned? That's the first question we need to ask. Second of all, if the United States had issued and declared a law that it was unconstitutional for public buses to be unconstitutional, for segregation to be unconstitutional on public buses, then why were the states in the South ignoring it and allowed to get away with it? Let me ask you this question. Is marijuana legal federally?
Nope. Federal law and state law, two different things.
So even though marijuana is federally illegal, we still have states that have legalized it, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So a state has a right to choose.
Yep. It has always had that fight, state against the federal. That's what the fight is.
So we're going to do a little bit more digging. Public buses in the 1960s, were they publicly owned or were they privately owned?
Sound like a non-profit service to me.
History of public bus transportation. Let's see, make sure. The bus industry in the United States. All right, so let's see what we got. All right, Grand Rising Brittany Davis. The bus industry in the United States. It says, despite its importance to everyday life, historians have paid surprisingly little attention to modern road transportation. There have been some valuable studies of the automobile, its production, and its impact on society and the economy. This article surveys the history of a branch of modern transportation that has been almost completely ignored. The history of motorized buses. Interesting, right? Because we don't talk about it. We know about the steamboat, right? We know about the train, right? But we don't know anything about the buses except for the bus boycott. So let's go into it. Why was there been such neglect? Part of the explanation lies in the image problem. As the slowest form of motorized transportation and the cheapest form of public transportation, buses, since the middle of the 20th century, have perceived as an option of those who cannot afford to travel by car, train, or plane. They have thus become associated with the young, the elderly, the poor, minority groups, and women. Hold on. They have thus become associated with the young, the elderly, the poor, minority groups, and women. Why does history not include women in minority groups? Something to think about. It says, historians have avoided contact with bus history as they have avoided contact with bus travel. They have preferred to pay attention to trains and rail companies, especially those of the 19th century, particularly the United States, where rail services has become geographically very limited. An ethos of pathons and romance is still associated with the iron horse. Indeed, there is an inverse relationship between the extent of academic and enthusiast knowledge and the use of modes of transportation, but perhaps of equal importance is encouraging rail and air travel research and writing is the maintenance of business records. These materials have been made available in corporate histories as a general interest reading. Bus records have not been easily accessible. Neither of the two materials deposited elsewhere have been scattered or haphazard. Other company archives are few in numbers and thin in volume. Bus information seems to be as scarce as bus passengers in recent times. Nevertheless, enough materials do exist to demonstrate that long-distance bus industries was offered a useful service and deserves to have its place in nation's history recognized. Grand Rising, Go to Moon. We're taking a look at the history or the bus industry because even though the government had deemed it illegal to segregate buses, the states, they didn't enforce it. So my question was, were these public buses publicly owned, or were they owned by the government? I think the facts will surprise you. It says the statistics and inner city passenger services provided a framework for understanding the growth of position of motor bus in the United States. In 1910, railway statistics were the only figures worth of note. With 240,631 miles of track in operation, trains provided a network capable of bringing the nation together. In the second decade of the 20th century, however, the automobile, now being mass-produced, became more readily available, and in the 1920s it became popular with one car per 6.6 persons. Then two other motor vehicles, the bus and the truck, emerged in their own right, and even the plane offered some pioneer passenger trips. As Table 1 documents in 1929, when figures were distributed of inner-city travel became available, the train had already lost out on the automobile, though it retained its dominance as a public carrier. For most of the remainder of the century, except for gasoline shortages during the Second World War, the private automobile accounted for over 80% of domestic inner-city travel. So,
hold on, 80%, that's a whole lot of people.
And it says 80% of inner-city travel.
It's a whole lot of melanated people, autos.
So I'm trying to get to who owned these public buses. So let's look at it this way. What we know about nonprofits and what we know about businesses. Now, to mind you, the HUD Act had not come out yet, but you still had vehicles offering public service. And I'm gonna leave it at that. So I'm looking to see who owned. Bingo. So, check this out. No particular date marks the beginning of the American inner city or long distance bus industry because so many individuals were attracted to it at a similar time when they perceived that they could make a profit by carrying fare-paying passengers over public highways. Early records suggest bus travel developed from being an adventure into a realistic business proposition in the second decade of the 20th century, when countless entrepreneurs scattered throughout the nation operating local services using automobile sedans frequently known as jitneys. Encouraged by their success, ambitious pioneers lost my place. Encouraged by the success, ambitious pioneers in the 1920s developed longer networks, either by connecting their routes with those like-minded entrepreneurs or by buying out their rivals. So, that question was answered. Grand Rising, Kerry.
I found something interesting on public transportation.
Go ahead, spill it.
It states urban public transit differs distinctly among Asia, North America, and Europe. In Asia, profit-driven, privately owned, and publicly traded mass transit and real estate conglomerates predominantly own and operate public transit systems. In North America, municipal transit authorities most commonly run mass transit operations. In Europe, both state-owned and private companies predominantly operate mass transit systems. Public transit services can be profit-driven by use of pay-by-the-distance fares or funded by government subsidies in which flat-rate fares are charged to each passenger. Services can be fully profitable through high usership numbers and high fare box recovery rates, or can be regulated and possibly subsidized from local or national tax revenue. Fully subsidized, free of charge services operate in some towns and cities.
Stop right there. Go back. Where
fully subsidized?
Yes.
About face.
It says fully subsidized, free of charge services operate in some cities and towns. And you know what those are? Them little trolleys that come and pick up the elderly to take them where they want to go. Cities that have like the little tourist areas and you got the free little shuttle buses that take you downtown around the sites. Any form of trolley that runs through the city.
So then when it says subsidized, like Free says, subsidized equals rich people welfare, which basically means the companies are being paid to serve the community.
I'm glad you said that. That got me mad again about that word. Switching up of the words, same meaning, but for them it's that. For us it's this.
So not only is it a form of double dipping, but to get you to think about something. we're in you talk about the 1950s and 60s. The government made it illegal to discriminate, right? Or segregate. The states didn't enforce it because there was probably nothing in the documentation that made it enforceable. The only thing that made it enforceable was what? People stopped riding. That boycott hurt the private sector because there were still buses or still modes of transportation that you can ride where there wasn't segregation. See, people were under the misconception that the government stepped in because of the boycott. No. The businesses were losing money, so they had to change their policy. Because they couldn't compete with the buses or businesses that were not segregated.
Always been labor driven. Ain't that funny?
So let's do some more reading. Encouraged by their success, ambitious pioneers in 1920 developed longer networks of connecting their routes. I already read that. It says they needed to acquire larger, more comfortable, and more reliable vehicles to meet the requirements of state governments who imposed regulations for safety, competition, financing, road construction, and accounting procedures. Competitions from the railroads threatened the well-being of promising bus companies. Some railroads decided to run subsidiary bus operations. Let me read that again. Some railroads decided to run subsidiary bus operations in the hope of squeezing out motor carriers. Others preferred to attack bus entrepreneurs through a propaganda campaign, claiming that buses were competing unfairly because they did not pay sufficient taxes for road use. Bus owners fought back both verbally and practically. Those who had gained enough experience and expertise to organize their firms systematically took advantage of the flexibility of their vehicles and did not run on fixed tracks and of the lower running costs of coaches to provide a cheaper service. By the 1920s, regional bus lines were visible and possibly of national lines suggested increased prospects.
That answers the question. The buses were privately owned.
Yep. But they didn't have to pay taxes for the road like the trains because the trains were on tracks.
And the trains were overseen by the government at this time. It seemed like the bus service wasn't yet.
Right. Okay, so she wants me to turn down the music a little bit. All right, give me a second. Is that better? Do this. So, let me know if that's better.
Yeah, because if you think about it at this time, the bus drivers or the owners of the bus, they were just citizens using the road. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a government regulated industry. So yeah, they wouldn't be paying a tax to drive around.
Nope.
They just doing a public service.
Yep.
Like they said, some companies ran off of full government subsidies.
Free says, hold up. What? That's a completely different narrative than what we were taught in school. So, that's the reason why we have to be willing to ask questions that no one's asking. Because people, you can't make us, well, not people, I'm not talking at you. We can't make assumptions. And the assumption was that because they said public transportation or public busing, we as a group, or we were taught, or it was implied, they go that word again, that it was government ran. And it wasn't. That's the reason why the federal government couldn't enforce it, because they weren't really subsidizing them to the point to where they were losing money. And because it was a cheaper means of transportation and more economic, right? Who do you think took a lot of those buses? Who do you think rode those buses more? Many of the Negro, melanated, black, mulattoes that lived in the suburbs, that worked in the cities. So let's go on to where it says the impact of the Great Depression. The onset of the Great Depression, however, brought painful changes to this adolescent service sector. Many small carriers went out of business when passengers and ticket sales declined as unemployment grew and most Americans could not afford to travel. The larger companies experienced both a cash flow and capital shortage, had to recognize their financial administrative structures, and had to ensure system-wide economies in order to survive. The travails of the only burgeoning national enterprise, Greyhound, are instructive of the difficulties faced. Much of the corporation's rapid expansion in the late 20s had been financed by short-term loans, which could not be repaid as income failed. Two recapitalization schemes in 1930 and 1933 were essential to meet current obligations. These involved loans from banks, negotiations with General Motors, and a reflotation of shares. The corporation then took constructive as well as defensive action, and rationalized its divisional structure. Strenuous efforts paid off, and Greyhound not only survived. It rationalized its divisional structure to become more competitive and continued to spend heavily in advertising and other media promotions. The strenuous efforts paid off, and Greyhound not only survived but also gained in market strength. Smaller firms with less credibility and creditworthiness struggled to remain solvent and were unable to expand, while the disposable incomes of Americans remained low. Greyhound, right? So the Depression affected the transportation of the buses. The federal government had expressed concern about the extent of the shape of the development long-distance bus industry before the Great Depression shattered the national economy. Starting in 1925, a series of 40 bills calling for the regulation of motor passenger carriers came before Congress. Congressional hearing and two major investigations by the Interstate Commerce Commission of the motor transportation industry in 1928 and 1932 made other suggestions for legislation, as did the Federal Coordinator of Transportation. But legislators felt under pressure from varied interest groups. What do you think those interest groups are? Because remember, who had the right to enforce or who had the right to influence votes? Interest groups, right? Nonprofits. James says Acadians own Greyhound. Emergency and short-term solutions came in the shape of the Bus Code of the National Industry Recovery Act, NIRA, of 1933, but rallied support for specific legislation. The ensuing Motor Carrier Act of 1935 entitled existing carriers to receive operating permits on filing applications and granted certificates to other firms only after investigation or hearing which established their buses was in the public interest. Certificates could be suspended, changed, or revoked. All interstate bus operators now had to conform to regulations governing safety, finance, insurance, accounting, and records. They were required to consult the government over any rate changes. Under the new regulations, the MCA competition between long-distance operators was limited. Existing companies who had filed permits protested against the applications from new competitors on their routes. If it was established that services were adequate and traffic was light, new applications were often turned down. The general thrust of the new policy supported larger companies, which more easily met federal government standards. The Greyhound Corporation, with its structure recognized and already providing a national service, had a virtual monopoly of long-distance services in part of the country. The administrative agency, the Motor Carrier Bureau, was well aware of both the potential abuse of monopoly power and economies of scale achievable by large operations. It thus encouraged an amalgamation of independent carriers to form new nationwide systems. National Trailways, ironically, this form of competition, which was officially encouraged in the bus industry, created a duopoly in many markets because most other operators were small companies that conducted much of their business in short-haul, suburban, and intra-regional transport. Influenced by historic concerns about regulating the railways, the government had created a new public policy that insisted on competition within the industry, even though the competition favored a smaller number of large firms. And even more ironically, by the mid-1930s, competition among the different modes of transportation meant that there was little constructive thought given to new national transportation policy that might coordinate these modes efficiently and effectively to use their natural advantage to best public effort. LJ Free says, Great Depression or Great Impression. We've witnessed so much historical theater. Good grief. History is losing the air out of this balloon right before our eyes. So here's something that we need to take into account also too at this time. The 1920s and 30s was a time where you were looking at antitrust laws because the Rockefellers had a lock on Standard Oil. So they had just lost a major lawsuit when it came to antitrust. That's the reason why there had to be at least a duopoly. And it was encouraging the other bus company. Just a thought. Just some historical context. And it says, for better or worse than the Second World War. War brought expansion of this bus industry, but under stressful conditions and with consequences that would have long-term implications. The need to carry both civilians and troops, combined with gasoline, rubber parts shortages, and forced Americans to move from their automobiles and onto public transportation. New records were set for passenger transportation. Seats were filled to capacity with standing room only. Long-distance bus passenger miles doubled from 13.6 billion in 1941 to 26.9 billion in 1945. This business was not achieved in a free market. A wartime administrative bureau, the Office of Defense Transportation, created in December 1941, managed traffic flows throughout the war. It used relatively simple devices such as rationing of parts, rubber, allocation, speed limits, fuel control, and restrictions of non-essential services to distribute scarce resources among transportation systems. They assisted by trade associations like the National Association of Motor Bus Operators. The ODT issued directives encouraging full capacity use and the rational use of passenger operations. Though bus companies abandoned competition with each other and with their long-standing rival, the railroads, they were unable to gain long-term benefits from their patriotic efforts to help win the war. Earnings rose, but it was impossible to invest part of all of these into an industry because the government curtailment of vehicle production and building construction activity. Hence, buses were kept in service beyond their normal life expectancy, and terminals were neither improved nor renovated. Speed limits of 35 miles per hour imposed in 1942 created longer man hours for drivers and lengthened journeys for passengers already frustrated and tired by waiting in crowded terminals. So basically, it looks like the government was trying to starve the buses out.
That's what I was just about to say. Especially if the government owns the railroad,
and if
they're losing money.
Oh, and they actually own the interstate. Despite the industry's wartime propaganda exhorting Americans either not to travel or to do so off-peak times and to be patient for the good of the country, the unaffordable impressions of inconvenience and discomfort of traveling by bus remain with many patrons. So it goes on to talk about the wartime conditions. Because if you think about this time, the buses were used to transport troops. So if you weren't on a contract to transport troops or transport parts and things of that nature, you were hard pressed to be able to operate. And then the government was making it more difficult to earn a living to travel through the daytime because they had to transport their troops. So the government restricted heavily what the buses could do. So it says the bus industry also adopted a fresh approach to consumer relations in the late 1950s and 60s. Again, Greyhound Corporation led the way. This new advertising agency, Grey Advertising, developed a novel and long-lasting campaign using a real dog, Lady Greyhound, rather than a traditional silhouette in bus publicity. The corporation was able to portray Lady Greyhound as a caring and sharing personality, and she gave press and radio interviews, opened bus stations, civic events, and charity functions, and replied to the members of her bus club. So they had to change their strategy. Hold on. Dudavision says, what were the Native Americans doing during this time? Fighting in the wars. World War I, World War II. And also fighting to keep their Indian identity. And this was the last stronghold. Oh, you said the Native Americans, not the American Indians. They were already on reservations, I guess. Well, yeah, because they've been on reservations since the 1800s. Oak Cliff says they're locked up. Do me a favor, Doodoo. Ask your question a different way because I don't wanna understand the question. You said what were the Native Americans doing during this time?
No, good question. Like you said, they didn't travel. Why would you be in all these lawsuits and all these working and stuff that's going on? Who they consider the so-called Native American? There's no place in these stories.
Right. And the funny thing is, the boycott is not even mentioned.
Because you have to ask yourself, who financed the boycott? Who gained from the bus boycott?
Railways, train stations.
Buses were able to move people around, especially during the time of the organizing of the civil rights. They can take you to a more spot-on location than the train.
That's true.
And at this time, being able to track people on buses was impossible to totally, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So it would make sense for the government to try to put their hands in it to stop certain movements or to take more control over it. If they're looking at it from their benefit.
Right. I'm trying to find out how the bus boycott affected them. They're glossed over it like it never even happened. You know what I'm thinking?
What's that? Because think about it. We know about the Rosa Parks story.
Right.
But if you say a lot more, we know there was somebody before Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
That the actual story is the woman before Rosa Parks. So we know law firms that they purposely didn't put the original lady on trial because she was unwed with children.
Right.
So behind the finance of this, the law firms and stuff that was picking and choosing the right character, the right face, with the right person to make the face of this.
Right. And Doodle said something crucial. He said the boycotts weren't against intercontinental buses. The boycotts were against city buses. And if you think about it, the only cities that were affected were the ones that were probably in Alabama, Mississippi, and the like. This wasn't a nationwide boycott. They just made it seem that way. Because it's not even mentioned in its history. It talks about the 50s and 60s, but it mentions nothing about the boycott whatsoever. So apparently the boycott only had a local or a regional effect. In that probably because there was only a few buses or a few cities that were actually discriminating. Am I missing something? So it wasn't as big as a uproar as we were believed.
Yeah, and the original lady was Claudette Colvin. She was 15 at the time when it happened in Montgomery. And this happened in what? It was March 2nd, 1955.
Mm-hmm.
August is December 5th, 1955. Well, end of November, beginning of December, yeah, around the 1st, 4 days after it started.
It says that, so now I'm back on the Freedom Riders page because they're making it seem like, put this here, because it said the Freedom Riders so the Freedom Riders challenges status quo by riding interstate buses in South and mixed racial groups who challenge local laws or customs that enforce segregating and seating. Bown said the city suffered because the white women used their jiffies to pick up their nannies. Yeah. Also, too, and it says the Freedom Riders challenges status quo by riding interstate buses in the South in mixed racial groups to challenge local laws or customs that enforce segregations and seating. The Freedom Riders and nonviolent reactions that bolstered the credibility of American civil rights movement. So, okay, so they were riding the interstate buses in protest for what was going on in the local laws.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem was, like Bumble said, the problem was not with the interstate buses. The problem was with the local buses. So they started riding the interstate buses, which caused the cities to lose more money.
Yeah, because you got to remember, city buses belong to who? The city. It tells you in the name, city buses.
Uh-oh, doorbell. Hold on, let me get that. What's going on, James?
Grand Rising there, James.
Well, come on in, gentlemen.
Greetings, one and all. This is Mr. Roper. I'm here to collect the rent.
Super.
So go ahead and clear up this mess that I created.
Oh, you good? You're good. One of the clips that you have on the PowerPoint says suffrage and and desegregation,
right.
and getting to the bus boycott. And I put in the chat about these white women using their jiffies. You know them better as station wagons. They were using these station wagons, then go and find out why they were called station wagons. These white women.
Bus station.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
Hold it now.
There you go. Get it.
They were using. This is how they were infiltrating what was being done by our people. Again, they were going and using that to pick up their nannies. They were using their station wagons. Your modern day, today, you know them as soccer moms. Oh, we'll pick your kids up. Yeah, we'll take them. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, that's why they were called station wagons. Which station wagons are known as, and ladies don't get mad at me, they're known as women wagons. Because you don't see majority of men driving station wagons. That wasn't cool. That was a mom's car. But that's where that movement started. I yield the mic.
They gave us a Dodge Magnum. We pushed it out with Carmelo Anthony. I remember that. They tried after the what is it? National Lampoon Christmas Vacation. They tried.
Yeah.
They tried to give it to us. Not ours.
Just
I appreciate that.
Context what Brother James just said. The name station wagon and the state car a result due to the initial purpose of the car being to transport people and luggage between a country, a state, and the nearest train station.
Who created the first station wagon? That's a rhetorical question. I'm going to look it up.
The first station wagons were built in around 1910 by independent manufacturers producing wooden custom bodies for the Ford Model T chassis. They were originally called depot hacks because they worked around train depots as hatches. Short for hat to be carried. As taxi cabs were then known. They also came to be known as cars or as carryalls and Suburbans. Station wagon was your first Suburban, y'all. Eventually, the car companies began producing their own station wagons. In 1923, Star, a division of Durant Motors, became the first car company to offer a station wagon assembled on its production line, using a wooden wagon body shipped in from an outside supplier.
David Corey says the Woody.
Used to pick people up back and forth between stations.
Grand Rising of Darian Woods.
For those that may not like to read, I would advise you watch the movie A Long Walk Home with Sissy Spacek and Whoopi Goldberg, and you'll see what was going on during that time, because this is talking about the bus boycotts and how those white women that were suffering decided, hey, we want to get involved, and started to go pick up their nannies. Again, hurting the city's pockets. It wasn't hurting Greyhound and Trailways, because at that time, I know they have merged, but at that time, they were two separate companies. It wasn't hurting them, because you think about those Freedom Riders were coming from where? Up north. And they were riding on these intercontinental buses. No issues. It never had been. Think about when school was out and people up north, Chicago, Detroit, for example, and in New York, they would do the same, send their children on those buses down south to spend time with their grandparents. If you were in New York, you were from the Carolinas, so they took the buses down to never an issue. From Chicago, you come through Arkansas, Mississippi, Detroit, you come to Alabama. That was never an issue. Never an issue when it came to where you were sitting on the bus. It was the city buses. I yield the mic.
There you have it.
Because why would any parent, especially a mother, send their children unsupervised on a bus down south? Think about it. Why would they do that if there were any issues on these buses? I yield the mic.
Wow.
It goes back. Who had the ability to enforce segregation on the bus? It would be local officials. Who else can enforce the policy? You knew the federal government couldn't enforce it.
LJ Free gives us a definition for suffrage. She says late 14th century intercessor prayers or pleas on behalf of another. From old French suffrage, plead, intercession. 13th century and directly from medieval Latin suffragium, from the Latin suffragium, support, ballot vote, right of voting, a voting tablet, lend support, vote for someone. Suffrage equals begging someone to represent and speak for you. So who do they do? So who do they get to represent and speak for them, ladies? Exactly, the Darian Woods, y'all. So let's look at the Nashville student movement continuation. Diane Nash, a Nashville college student, who was a leader of the Nashville student movement and SNCC believed that if Southern violence were allowed to halt the Freedom Riders, the movement would be set back years. She pushed to find replacements to resume the rides. On May 17th, a new set of riders, 10 students from Nashville, who were active in the Nashville student movement, took a bus to Birmingham, where they were arrested by Bull Connor and jailed. The students kept their spirits up in jail by singing freedom songs. Out of frustration, Connor drove them back to the Tennessee line and dropped them off saying, "I just couldn't stand their singing." They immediately returned to Birmingham. So who is this Diane Nash?
Good question from Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Let's see.
Okay, I gotta show this. That's her. Can y'all see her? It says Diane Judith Nash is an American civil rights activist. So it doesn't say she's African American. It doesn't say she's African. It says she's an American civil rights movement. So what does she classify as? White woman? It says Nash's campaigns were among the most successful of the era. Whoa. How were her campaigns the most successful of the era? It said included the first successful civil rights campaign to integrate lunch counters, Nashville. The Freedom Riders who desegregated interstate travel, co-founding the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and coordinating the Alabama Voting Rights Project and working on the Selma Voting Rights Movement. This helped gain congressional passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which authorized the federal government to oversee and enforce state practices to ensure that Negroes, mulattoes, and blacks and other minorities were not prevented from registering and voting. So wait a minute. Her alma mater is Howard University and Fisk University. So
Rolling up in those HBCU.
say again.
HBCU.
Yeah, but she's not black. Well, they don't have a list as back. They just say she's an American civil rights activist.
She's a white woman, minority.
Yeah. Well, yeah, she's a minority, but I'm just saying that's just interesting. Oh yeah, that's how she would go to HBCU. It says
Keep going, keep reading, keep going.
Nash was born in 1938 and raised in Chicago by her father Leon Nash and her mother Dorothy Bolton Nash in middle-class Catholic area. Her father was a veteran of World War II. Her mother worked as a key punch operator during the war, leaving Nash in the care of her grandmother, Carrie Bolton, until age 7. Bolton was a cultured woman known for her refinement and manners. After the war, Nash's parents' marriage ended. Dorothy married again to John Baker, a waiter on the railroad dining cars owned by the Pullman Company. Baker was a member of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, one of the most powerful black unions in the nation. As Dorothy no longer worked outside the house, Diane saw less of her grandmother, Carrie Bolton, but she continued as an important influence in Nash's life. Bolton was committed to making sure her granddaughter understood her worth and value and didn't discuss race often, believing that racial prejudice was something that was taught to younger generations by their elders. Her grandmother's words and actions.
Hold on, brother. Can you put a comma right there? She let her marry a what? A who? A when? A where? Who's she married again? And then you continue reading.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Dorothy married again to John Baker, a waiter on the railroad dining cars owned by the Pullman Company. Baker was a member of the Brotherhood Sleeping Car Porters, one of the most powerful black unions in the nation. So her mother remarried and she married a black man or a mulatto or an Indian. Her grandmother's words and actions.
Hold on. What? Can you say that again? I'm sorry. Say that again.
It said, Dorothy married again to John Baker, a waiter on the railroad dining cars owned by Pullman Company. And it said, one of the most powerful black unions in the nation. As Dorothy no longer worked outside the house, Diane saw less of her grandmother. So her mother.
Oh, wait. What? So take it there. What? I'm telling you, watch the Infiltration. Now, for those that don't like to read again, look at the documentary 10,000 Men Named George. And that'll go back to the Pullman Company and those waiters that were on those trains. I yield the mic. Go ahead. I just wanted to read that part. Go ahead. Keep going. Keep reading. Woo.
It said her grandmother's words and actions instilled Diane with confidence and a strong sense of self-worth, while also creating a bit of a sheltered environment that left her vulnerable to the severity of racism in the outside world as she grew older. It says Nash attended Catholic schools at one point, considering becoming a nun. She also was a runner-up in a regional beauty pageant leading to the competition for Miss Illinois. After finishing Hyde Park High School in Chicago, Diane Nash went to Washington, D.C. to attend Howard University, a historically black college. After a year, she transferred to Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, where she majored in English. Nash acknowledged that she looked forward to a personal growth during her time at college and wanted to explore the challenging issues of the time. In Nashville, she was first exposed to the full force of Jim Crow laws and customs and their effort in the lives of blacks. Nash encountered her experience at the Tennessee State Fair, where she had to use the colored women's restroom, signifying the first time she had ever seen and been impacted by segregation signage. Outraged by the realities of segregation, Nash began to show signs of leadership and soon became a full-time activist. So why would she have to use a colored women's restroom?
Good question.
Unless she was hanging around some Negroes.
That's all she was hanging around. Look at the school she went to.
Yeah.
She was Rachel who? DeJarial or whatever her name is. Go ahead, keep going, keep reading. This good. That's good, real good. Keep reading.
Nash's family members were surprised when she joined the civil rights movement. Her grandmother was quoted as saying, "Diane, you've gotten in the wrong bunch." She did not know that Diane was the chairwoman of organizing the nonviolent protests at her university. Her family was not familiar with the idea of working for civil rights. Diane Nash spoke to how it took her family time to come around to accept her as a key player in the civil rights movement. But her mother began to use fundraising abilities to raise money for the Freedom Riders. Nash said in the PBS Tavis Smiley interview, "My mother ended up going to fundraisers in Chicago that were raising money to send the students in the South, and actually over years, we went to an elevated train bus station on one day at 6 a.m. to hand out leaflets protesting the war." Her mother was influenced by Nash's sense of empowerment. At Fisk, Nash searched for a way to challenge segregation. Nash began attending nonviolent civil disobedience workshops led by James Lawson while in India. James Lawson had studied Mahatma Gandhi's techniques of nonviolence, direct action, and passive resistance used in his political movement. By the end of her first semester at Fisk, Nash had become one of Lawson's most devoted disciples. Although originally a reluctant participant in nonviolence, Nash emerged as a leader due to her well-spoken, composed manner when speaking to the authorities and to the press. In 1960, at age 22, she became the leader of Nashville sit-ins, which lasted from February to May. Lawson's workshops included simulations in order to prepare the students to handle verbal and physical harassment that they would ultimately face during the sit-ins. In preparation, the students would venture out to segregated stores and restaurants, doing nothing more than speaking with the manager when they were refused service. Lawson graded their interactions in each simulation and sit-in, reminding them to have love and compassion for their harassers. This movement was unique for the time in that it was led by and composed primarily of college students and young people. The Nashville sit-ins spread to 69 cities across the United States. Though protests would continue in Nashville and across the South, Diane Nash and 3 other students were first successfully served at the Post House restaurant in March 17, 1960. Students continued the sit-ins at segregated lunch counters for months, accepting arrests in lines with nonviolent principles. Nash, with John Lewis, led the protesters in the policy of refusing to pay bail. In February 1961, Nash served jail time in solidarity with the Rock Hill 9. 9 students imprisoned after a lunch counter sit-in. They were all sentenced to pay $50 fines for sitting at a white counter's lunch counter. Chosen as spokesperson, Nash said to the judge, "We feel that if we pay these fines, we will be contributing to and supporting the injustice and immoral practices that have been performed in the arrest and conviction of the defendants." When Nash asked Nashville's mayor Ben West on the steps of City Hall, "Do you feel it is wrong to discriminate against a person solely on the basis of their race or color?" the mayor admitted that he did. 3 weeks later, the lunch counter of Nashville's were serving blacks. Reflecting on this event, Nash said, "I have a lot of respect for the way he responded. He didn't have to respond the way that he did. He said what he felt. It was wrong for citizens of Nashville to be discriminated against at at the lunch counter solely on the basis of the color of their skin. That was a turning point. That day was very important. While participating in the Nashville sit-in, Diane Nash first met fellow protester James Bevel, who she would later marry. Let me see this. Who is...
Yeah, go. Yeah. Now you get to where the rubber meets the road. Yeah. Look up Bevel. Go ahead. Come on.
Wow.
Dun 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 dun.
Wow.
If you love that color, go use that colored restroom, gal.
Wow. He lived in Springfield, Virginia, up until he died in December 19, 2008. Wow. The infiltration is real, y'all.
And y'all thought Rachel Desarial was the first one to do this. Come on, son. Woo!
Cliff says about to crash my Jiffy. Man, this is crazy. They smile in your face all the time. They want to take your place. Y'all know the rest.
She got her man from the deep woods of Mississippi. Woo! Nice colored man. And then her family couldn't understand why she got involved in the movement. Come on, son. When her mama and her would both, come on, man. Y'all don't see it? Come on, I'm out the way.
They had 2 children together, a son and a daughter. The couple divorced after 7 years of marriage, and Nash never remarried. In August 1961, Diane Nash participated in a picket line to protest a local supermarket's refusal to hire blacks. When local white youth started egging the picket line and punching various people, police intervened. They arrested 15 people, only 5 of whom were the white attackers. All but one of the blacks who were jailed accepted the $5 bail and were freed, but Nash stayed. The 21-year-old activist had insisted on her arrest with the other blacks, and once in jail refused bail.
Wait. Which means initially they were not going to arrest her. She insisted on being arrested. Okay, I'm out the mic. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Nah, bro. Point that out. Uh-oh. Let me bring the music back.
In other words, they told her, ma'am, you're not one of them. You're free to go. But I want to go. Ma'am, you're free to go. But I want to go. And then you refuse bail. Yeah. Y'all go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead. What's this women's suffrage? All about? I am woman, hear me roar. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm out the mic. I'm going.
Look. I am woman, hear me roar. You don't need your man, so I'll take yours. So in spring 1960, nearly 200 students involved with the nationwide sit-in movement arrived in Raleigh, North Carolina for an organizing conference. There, the SCLC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, at L. Baker's request, sponsored the students' meeting in April 15th. Martin Luther King envisioned a simple SCLC student league, but Baker herself advised the youth to remain autonomous and follow their own principles. What? Wait a minute. The request sponsored the students' meeting in April 15th. Martin Luther King envisioned a simple SCLC student league, but Baker herself advised the youth to remain autonomous and follow their own principles. Accordingly, in April 1960, Nash was one of the leading founders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, pronounced SNCC. Independent of any adult organizations and quit school to lead its direct action wing. Independent of any adult organization, and quit school to lead its direct action wing. In the coming years, organizations such as CORE and SCLC would try to recruit SNCC as their own student wing, with SNCC always resisting the invitations. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee would go on to be involved with some of the most important campaigns of the civil rights era. In early 1961, Nash and 10 fellow students were put under arrest in Rock Hill, South Carolina for protesting segregation. Once jailed, they would not accept a chance for bail. This dramatic event began to bring light to the fight for racial justice that was beginning to emerge. It also highlighted the idea of jail no bail, which was utilized by many other civil rights activists as the fight for the rights progressed. Originally fearful of jail, Nash was arrested dozens of times for her activism. She spent 30 days in South Carolina jail after protesting segregation in Rock Hill in February 1961. In 1962, although she was 4 months pregnant with her daughter Sherry, she faced a 2-year prison sentence in Mississippi for contributing to the delinquency of minors, whom she encouraged to become freedom riders on a ride of the buses. Despite her pregnancy, she was ready to serve her time with the responsibility of her daughters being born in jail. Nash took the weight of this possibility seriously, spending 2 days praying and meditating before coming to a decision and penning an open letter. I believe that if I go to jail, it may help hasten that day when my child and children will be free, not only on the day of their birth, but for all their lives. She was sentenced to 10 days in jail in Jackson, Mississippi, where she spent her time there washing her only set of clothes in the sink during the day and listening to the cockroaches skitter overhead at night. Wow.
Oh, keep going. It gets better. Go ahead, keep going.
Nash would go on to serve many roles for the SCLC from 1961 to 1965, while it was under Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Though years later, Nash is clear about how she saw herself in relation to King, stating, "I never considered Dr. King my leader. I always considered myself at his side, and I considered him at my side. I was going to do what the Spirit told me to do. So if I had a leader, that was my leader." She later cut ties with the SCLC, questioning their leadership structure, including their male and clergy-dominated ranks. She would also split from SNCC in 1965 when their directives changed under Stokely Carmichael's leadership, taking particular issue with the organization's departure from the founding pillar of nonviolence.
Can we take a moment to pause right there?
Sure.
Do you see how she infiltrated the ranks? First, she said that I didn't consider him my leader.
Right.
But side by side. Then she later on split because she didn't like how it was organized.
Right.
This male leadership, clergy dominated the ranks. Now, again, going back, brothers and sisters that are listening in the chat, it was always husband and wives working in tandem. So where did she get this narrative? How did she draw this narrative that the men were doing everything? When you look at everything doing any of our movements, it's always been the husband and the wife working together. So why? Now you see how this women's suffrage starts to split. I am woman, hear me war, let me burn my bra. See how this trend is going?
Yeah.
And this is what I say about lesbian spirits. They can marry a man. They can appear in all aspects on the surface to be heterosexual, but they have these lesbian spirits. Has nothing to do with your sexual orientation. Go ahead, brother. I just want to put that out there. Go ahead, keep going.
Okay, so freedom riders. "We will not stop. There is only one outcome," stated Diane Nash, referring to the 1961 Core Freedom Riders designed to challenge state segregation of interstate buses and facilities. The project was suspended by Core after a bus was firebombed and several riders were severely injured in attacks by a mob in Birmingham, Alabama. Nash called on Fisk University and other college students to fill buses to keep the Freedom Riders going. They traveled to the South to challenge the states. Nashville students, encouraged by Nash, promptly decided to finish the trip that had been suspended at Birmingham. New Orleans Congress of Racial Equality. The Nashville students and Nash were committed, ready, and willing. It was clear to me that if we allowed the Freedom Ride to stop, at that point, just after so much violence had been inflicted, the message would have been sent that all you have to do is stop a nonviolent campaign is inflict massive violence, says Nash. Nash took over responsibility from the Freedom Rides and worked to recruit riders, act as media spokesperson, and garner the support of the government and other movement leaders. Coordinating from Nashville, she led the Freedom Riders from Birmingham, Alabama to Jackson, Mississippi, where Corps Field Secretary Tom Gaither coordinated a massive program on the ground. After several attacks, Executive Director James Farmer Jr., a veteran of Corps' original in 1947 Freedom Rides, was hesitant to continue them. Nash talked with the students of the Nashville Student Movement and argued that we can't let them stop us with violence. If we do, the movement is dead. Nash remained adamant that they not send a message to the public that civil rights efforts could be stopped with violence. As the violence escalated and bus drivers began to refuse service to the riders due to the dangers, Attorney General Robert Kennedy became involved and worked to keep the rides going. Kennedy called the Alabama governor and the Greyhounds bus company to implore them to allow the riders to continue. Kennedy insisted that his special assistant John Siegenthaler travel to Alabama to get directly involved in the matter. Siegenthaler informed the reluctant Alabama governor that it was the government's duty to protect these citizens during the Freedom Rides. Nash spoke with Siegenthaler on the phone, and Siegenthaler warned her that the Freedom Ride could result in death and violence for participants. She responded, "We know someone will be killed, but we cannot let violence overcome nonviolence." Nash explained that Siegenthaler that she and other students had already signed their wills. John Lewis, who had just returned from the Freedom Ride, agreed to continue it, as did other students. A contingent of activists from New Orleans Corps also participated. They continued the action to successful conclusion 6 months later. When Nash was bringing a batch of students to Birmingham to continue the ride, she telephoned Birmingham activist Fred Shuttlesworth to inform him. He responded to her sternly, "Young lady, do you know that the Freedom Riders were almost killed there?" Nash assured him that she did and that would not stop her from continuing the ride. After gathering the final list of riders, she placed a phone call to Shuttleworth. They knew their phone line had been tapped by local police, so they worked out a set of code messages related to all things poultry. For instance, roosters were substituted for male Freedom Riders, hens were female riders, and so on. When Nash called Shuttleworth again on Wednesday morning to tell him the chickens were boxed, he knew that the Freedom Riders were on their way. On May 20th, 1961, the riders left Birmingham for Montgomery with the promise of protection from the federal government, including police escorts and planes flying overhead. After about 40 miles, all signs of protection disappeared and the riders were subject to a violent, angry mob armed with makeshift weapons such as pipes and bricks. Both white and black riders were injured by the mob, including Special Assistant John Siegenthaler, who exited his car to help one of the female riders who was being beaten. When all the riders had left the bus terminal, 5 of the female riders phoned Shuttlesworth, who relayed their whereabouts to Nash. Others called Nash directly to inform her of the chaotic situation that had occurred. Fearing that all the riders were subject to arrest, Nash advised them to stay out of sight from the police, but this was compromised by Wilbur and Herman, who had called the police after fleeing from the terminal area. On May 21st, 1961, Martin Luther King Jr. arrived at the First Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. King had caused tension between himself and Freedom Riders, Nash included, due to his refusal to participate in the rides. Diane Nash was present at the First Baptist Church that night and is credited with playing a key role in getting King to come to speak in support of the Freedom Riders. More than 1,500 citizens were trapped inside the church overnight as violence raged outside. Martial law had to be declared by Alabama Governor John Patterson to finally bring an end to the mob. Governor Patterson had been highly criticized by many within the movement for his unwillingness to support to protect the riders. This was the first time he and the state of Alabama had moved to protect the movement. King preached to the crowd inside the church while tear gas seeped in from outside, telling them that they would remain calm and continue to stand up for what they knew was right. In 1963, President John F. Kennedy appointed Nash to a national committee to promote civil rights legislation. Eventually, his proposed bill was passed as Civil Rights Act of 1964. So she was the one that got that bill passed?
Man, if this don't sound...
Wow.
Oh, this sound like some Faith Evans, Lil' Kim stuff. I can love you better than she can. What's going on up in this camp?
Wow. I mean, talking about ride or die, she's like, we already signed our wills. This chick was crazy.
Like the chat, was she on the front lines?
Bones, you're breaking up, bro. You're breaking up really bad. We can't hear you.
Was she on the front lines?
What you say?
Was she on the front lines?
You said what's
She
your...
out there in the streets.
Apparently they don't want you to talk. Are you asking was she on the front lines? You gonna go on and come back in. So I'll wait for him to come back, but I continue reading. Shocked by 1963 church bombing in Birmingham, they killed 4 young girls. Nash and James Bevel committed to raising a nonviolent army in Alabama. Their goal was to vote for every black adult in Alabama. The goal was to vote for every black adult in Alabama, a radical position at the time. Alabama and other southern states had effectively excluded blacks from the political system since disenfranchising them at the turn of the century. I got it. Come on in, Bones. What was you saying? Okay.
1, 2.
Yeah, we hear you. Go ahead. What was you saying? You said something about the front lines.
Yeah, I wanted to know, was she on the front lines? She putting on these people in a line of fire, especially with 1,500 people held hostage up in the church. And she invited everybody there when you know what's going on at the time.
She was at some of the stuff, but it don't sound like she was at the most radical stuff. So it says, after funerals for the girls in Birmingham, Nash confronted SCLC leadership with their proposal. She was rebuffed, but continued to advocate this revolutionary nonviolent blueprint. Together, the SCLC, Nash, and Bevel eventually implemented the Selma to Montgomery marches, a series of protests for voting rights in Alabama in early 1965. They were initiated and organized by James Bevel, who was running SCLC's Selma voting rights movement. Marches across the Pettus Bridge on their way to the state capital to Montgomery, but after they left the city limits, they were attacked by county police and Alabama state troopers armed with clubs and tear gas. Determined to break up the peaceful march, John Lewis, who had knelt to pray, had his skull fractured. The images were broadcast over national television, shocking the nation. Soon after this, President Lyndon Johnson publicly announced that it was wrong, deadly wrong, to deny any of your fellow Americans the right to vote in this country. The initiative culminated in passage by Congress in 1965 Voting Rights Act, which authorized the federal government to oversee and enforce the constitutional right to vote. The mechanisms to assess the state compliance and require changes to enable registration and voting. In 1965, SCLC gave its highest award to Rosa Parks Award to Diane Nash and James Bevel for their leadership in initiating and organizing the Alabama Project at the Selma Voting Rights Movement. Wow.
Yep, she was in it to win it. She was at the Selma march when all of it went left. She was one of those on the front line. She's cropped out of a lot of pictures later on, but she was there. That's why I said she was the little Kim to to Coretta Scott King's Faith Evans.
Wow. It says during the Civil Rights era and shortly after, many of the male leaders received most of the recognition for its success. As the Civil Rights era has been studied by historians, Nash's contributions have been more fully recognized. In 1995, historian David Halberstam described Nash as bright, focused, utterly fearless, and with an unringing instinct for the correct tactical move at each increment of the crisis. As a leader, her instincts have been flawless, and she was the kind of person who pushed those around her to be at their best or be gone from the movement. Nash is featured in an award-winning documentary film series Eyes on the Prize and 2000 series A Force More Powerful about the history of nonviolent conflict. She is also featured in a PBS American Experience documentary of the Freedom Riders based on the history of the same name. Nash is also credited with her work at David Halberstam's book about Nashville student movement, The Children, as well as Diane Nash, the fire of the Civil Rights Movement. In addition, go ahead.
But didn't you just come in and plug herself into something that was already going on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm just checking.
In addition, she received the Distinguished American Award from the John F. Kennedy Library and Foundation, the LBJ Award for Leadership and Civil Rights from the Lyndon Baines Johnson Library and Museum, 2004. Nash was continued to believe in the power of nonviolent action to solve conflicts. In an interview with Teresa Anderson, she says, "Violence needs to be addressed. I think the Civil Rights Movement has demonstrated how to resolve human conflicts. I think it's crazy when two countries have problems with each other and one says, let's bomb them, kill them, go fight. If we have a problem with another country, I would like to see consideration instead of automatic tendency to go to war. Let's hear their side, consider our side, and look at what is logical and reasonable. Let's look at what serves the best interests of people and see if we can negotiate solutions, more sane solutions." After the Civil Rights Movement, Nash moved back to Chicago, where she worked in fields of education and real estate, continuing as an advocate and champion causes such as fair housing and anti-war efforts. She still lives in Chicago, only a few miles away from her son Douglas Bevel, with whom she remains very close. In 2013, Nash expressed her support for Barack Obama while also sharing her reluctance for his continued involvement in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. While encouraged by the positive implications associated with electing the first black president of the United States, Nash still believes that the true changes in American society will come from its citizens, not government officials. Although she attended the Selma 50th anniversary celebrations in March 2015, Nash was noticeably absent from the restaging of the 1965 Selma March. When asked about her refusal to participate in the historic event, Nash cited the attendance of former President George W. Bush. Nash, who was dedicating her life to pursuits of peace and nonviolence, declared that Bush stands for just the opposite. Both violence and war and stolen elections and his administration had people tortured. Decades after she played a critical role in the Civil Rights Movement, Diane Nash remains committed to the principles of nonviolence that have guided her throughout her life. Although she was a key architect of many of the movement's most successful efforts, she remains humble upon reflection. It took many thousands of people to make the changes that we made, people whose names we'll never know. They'll never get credit for the sacrifices they made, but I remember them. Why don't you say their names? Anyway. So let me see what's going on in the chat, because I was reading. LJ Free says, how important are we really when the entire world is set up against us and participating in stealing lands, birthrights, titles, and identities? It's sad, but we win, so. Darren says, it is sad. I hope that one day we can all stand together and show everyone we can be together as one and stand on our own and do our own in every way possible. I believe in my people. You don't want it. Says, is this who they got on tape with King? The way she act, you would think so.
Well, this is gonna get me in trouble, probably get me banned, but Oak Cliff Tiff, you own it. And you're gonna be able to check into some things to verify what I'm about to say, Oak Cliff Tiff. In the late 1960s, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King came to Dallas. A lot of people don't know this. He came to Dallas. The government officials, the white government officials, went to the colored pastors in the Dallas area at that time and said, do not allow him to rally things up. Things are going good between us. Don't allow King, and I won't say the other name that they called him, to come to Dallas and rally things up. He came to Dallas along with this other individual, Nash, and there were 12 pastors, local pastors of Dallas that were there. It is not known to the masses that he came to Dallas. The deal that the pastors got out of that was the West Dallas Project. They got that community built. Now that community was built upon an old arsenal plant, lead-based underground bombs. Some that were couldn't have been detonated. Some that was still possibly could be detonated. All this came out of that because they sold to the devil. She was one of those that came. Now, I will discuss in the back chat how I know that intimate information, but let's just say I had some close family members, get back again to my relatives and their connections with the National Baptist Convention that were in attendance. And yes, that's why I say again, she was Little Kim. I yield the mic.
Wow. I mean, what do you say to that? Infiltration at its finest. Infiltration at its finest. Bones, no sellout. Help.
I'm still in wild mode.
Help.
No, because as you started going through the story, I started like not wanting to speculate, but I'm like, hold on.
Yeah,
Is this that one about they got on tape? The one that they sent to his wife? Hold on, man. You kind of close.
You been on your knees, Honda, with your knees and Rhonda. What?
Wow. Yeah. So is that the reason why she is like cropped out of all the pictures and you don't hear anything about her?
Yes, sir. And you won't find too many outings where she and Lady Coretta Scott King were coordinating things together.
Patrick Gabriel says, I forgot my hard hat. I have a headache. Patrick, you and me both, and I had my hard hat on.
You know?
Darn.
Someone asked me a question in the chat. I think it was David Corey, because I'm going back and forth. No, I'm not, but I'll say this. Let's just say that Reverend Dr. E.K. Bailey was my mother's big brother when they attended Bishop College, which is now Paul Quinn College. So if that gives you a little hint on, again, who my people are, if those in the Dallas area that have been here for a while should know about Reverend Dr. E.K. Bailey. I yield the mic.
More verification. More people in Texas that can verify and vouch for Doodoo Vision. But haters are gonna hate.
Why?
You're spot on, Brother David Corey. Again, my mother was one of the first, I guess, dual credit students. When she was 16, she graduated high school and was attending Bishop College simultaneously because my grandmother was an English professor there at Bishop College. And so with her being so young, Reverend Dr. E.K. Bailey was her big brother because, back then you wasn't just going to let a 16-year-old girl just, in the big city of Dallas, just wander around by herself. So everywhere that she went, he went. So my mother was exposed to a lot of these things that were going on. And that's how I know what was taking place during this secret meeting that the white leaders had. One, there is a major road in Dallas named after one of these leaders that I'll give a little bit later that was there. Again, he was one of those that were instrumental in the West Dallas projects and the discussions that were had behind the scenes with Mrs. Nash and what she was doing. And she was pulling the strings. Not because, I put it this way. Y'all remember that scene from Thin Line Between Love and Hate when the mama was talking to Martin? Mm-hmm. And she told him about, just a moment of passion could lead to a lifetime and what he started going through because of one moment. Mm-hmm. So Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was trapped because they had that information. That is what Robert Kennedy, aka Bobby, that's part of the reason why he was assassinated. Everybody think, it's because he wanted to be president. No, he had those files and he told them to get rid of it because during JFK's presidency, what was Robert Kennedy's role? What was he in charge of? I yield the mic.
No, what was he in charge of? Because I don't know.
That's a question for those in the chat.
Oh, but you got to back up right quick because you said something and you glossed over it. Said he was in charge of housing. Or housing?
Nope. Keep going. He had well, not saying that housing wasn't important, but he had a more vital role, a more important role in the presidential cabinet.
So, Mr. Doodle Vision, you mentioned that your grandmother was a professor, right? Cliff Tiff says land grants.
Oh, sorry, did we get kicked off?
No, I was asking you a question. I don't know if you heard it, but she said, was it land grants?
No, Robert Kennedy was the Attorney General of the United States. He received those photos, the phone conversations between Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Diane Nash, and told them to get rid of them. Because remember, the conflict was between the office of the presidency and the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover had those tapes and those photos, and who was booking the hotels. Because if you recall, what started even in Tennessee that led up to the assassination of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, he was booked in a white hotel. How was he getting booked into these white-only hotels? Diane Nash was booking them. Remember, he had to change hotels. That's how they ended up at the Negro Hotel. Because people were getting upset saying, how you gonna fight for our people and you staying in a whites-only hotel?
A lot of people never paid attention to that too, and some of them photos and stuff that you see him coming from fancy hotels right out front. How was you getting there at a time where ain't nobody? You the biggest face right now.
She was booking, Nash was booking the hotels. And yes, I'm sorry, Brother Thomas, I'm asking your question. Yes, my grandmother was an English professor at Bishop College, which is now Paul Quinn College.
So that means in order for her to be a professor at a college, she had to go to college.
She attended Prairie View A&M. She was, like I said, my grandmother was one of the nieces that stayed with my great uncle, Dr. Lacey Kirk Williams. Because my grandmother ended up my grandmother's mother ended up getting convicted because a white man tried to take advantage of her and she cut him. So while my great grandmother was serving her time, my grandmother was living with my great uncle, L.K. Williams. So he was paying for whether you were nieces or nephews, and his children, he paid for all of them to go to college. He sent them to college. And my grandmother was born in 1907. So that lets you know right there, when they talk about these women not going to college and all this stuff, she was going off to college.
The things you learn when you listen to people talk. Wow. What do you say to that? I mean, LJ Free says she cut him. Is Grandma Sakari?
There she go again.
I told you about Lady Free. Sorry, didn't mean to change the flow of the show.
No, I mean you.
Oh, it never does. It puts it on point.
Exactly. Yeah. Everything makes sense. Grand Rising, Trab, Bab. Hopefully you was able to get a lot of these nuggets, because this show was woo
explosive.
I gotta hit it again.
But they say when you do these timelines and you start applying everything at the time that was going on, You get to see a truer picture.
Yeah. Because I mean, she was like, it was like she was involved in everything. There was very little when it came to the civil rights movement that she was not involved in.
But then you also got to look at the other things that was going along. You had what Betsy Mink going on at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So you can see it. You had the evidence to hijack it. Who's gonna say anything? You know about the tapes. You part of it.
If y'all have an opportunity, and I know it's getting late in the hour, but if you all could to further verify, because I don't want to give anybody information and they say that that's just doodle vision flying off the chain and he doesn't know what he's talking about. If someone could just look up Good Street Baptist Church in Dallas and tell me what you find right quick.
Oh, you have a question from the chat as well, Doodle. Somebody want to know, is she related to Reverend Nash in Dallas?
No, those were two different groups, because Pastor Nash was also my mother's one of the big brothers as well that attended Bishop. But those are two different groups of people. Yeah. Matter of fact, Elder Nash, Pastor Nash, used to pastor in my hometown. He used to pastor Goodwill Baptist Church before he went on to Mount Tabor. But when you look up Good Street, you'll see how all of this is connected with Dr. Nash and Dr. E.K. Bailey and all of them who they were understudies of, and going back to Good Street Baptist Church. And then you'll find out how I know the inside connection on what took place at that secret meeting here in Dallas, when Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King came with Diane Nash. That's why I say just keep reading, because it's gonna get good. Oh, yes. I yield the mic.
So, here we go. Good Street Baptist Church. In 1884, the Macedonian Baptist Church was organized by the Reverend A.R. Griggs. It was located on Montezuma Street, not far from the second church location, 902 Good Lattimore Expressway. In 1907, a one-story frame building was erected under the pastor of Dr. L.K. Williams, and in 1922... Stop. In 1922, it was what? With who? It was erected under the pastorate of Dr. L.K. Williams. That would be Dr. Lacey Kirk Williams, my great uncle. Now you see the connection as why my family was involved with these pastors here in Dallas, and the connection, what I was talking about, dealing with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and prior to that, dealing with the movement known as the Nation of Islam, known as the Moorish Science Temple, known as dealing with the Garveyites. All of that, my folk were involved and have been involved. Go ahead, continue. I'm sorry. You can stop right there. I just wanted to, because I know there's some that are listening that will never comment in the chat, that are going to challenge, certain things that are being said. So I wanted to give you all evidence of who I am, further evidence of who I am and who I come from. I yield the mic. I put the link in the chat too. So, wow. So you may not find this in the history books, but I'm telling you, Diane Nash was the one that was going around booking all of these white hotels for Dr. King and his entourage. And why at one point that Lady Coretta Scott King stopped going with him and she started staying at home. They were like, oh, tend to the children. She was tending to the children. Nope, that was because of conflict between Nash and Lady Coretta Scott King, because it was about to be on and popping.
But that's why Robert Kennedy had to be assassinated, because he kept stomping on what J. Edgar Hoover kept trying to do, because he wanted to expose it. He had audio tapes from the phone calls, he had letters, and he had photos and personal testimony from those that knew about their relationship. I yield the mic. So, melanated woman, why you mad at us? And you thought who you thought you was your friend and who the fight was for in the end? Because after that she shifted and started saying, wait a minute, all these men and all these clergy are running things. We don't want that. It's about me. Then she started going on her world tours, giving all these speeches, which is why Wikipedia says that she was what? Her movement was the most successful. Why? Why did it switch from what was really being done to her? The focal point being on her. Y'all think about it. We are not your enemy. We love you. I yield the mic.
Deep. Want to go deep? We take you deep. Deeper than that page of a book. Let us look.
Again, this is why you need to understand the importance of the timelines. Why you need to understand the importance of nonprofits and how they're organized, and how they're set up, and how things run, and how things operate. Because you can trace the money, you can trace associations, and you know who does what. So, how's that for the Board of Education versus Brown?
The things that are attached to these moments in history that they never talk or tell you about.
But you can find it.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interject, but I'm sorry, Brother David, Corey. I just saw your question. Yes, they were trying to eliminate Lady Coretta Scott King because she knew when you know too much. And this is why I said I can talk now, because my mother has transitioned, and my mother has transitioned, my great grandmother has transitioned, my great uncle was assassinated. So now I don't. They talking about they waiting for the Kennedy files to be released after the whole generation is dead. I don't mind sharing that information, and if and when they finally released it, then you'll have concrete evidence from the government that everything that I said this morning will match up to the T. So yes, that's why they were trying to eliminate, because again, follow the career of Diane Nash and how she was going to all these places, and then she always throws in like, oh, that she and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King met on a double date. That it was him and Lady Coretta Scott King and her and they were on a double date. She tries to emphasize that's how they met. But again, hey, you don't have to believe me. You don't have to take my word for it. Just keep doing more research and you'll find out. I yield the mic.
I ain't got, man, look. I ain't got nothing. I ain't got it. I'm speechless.
Yes, Oak Cliff Tip, because Paul Quinn College now sits on the campus of Bishop, because you have some that took money from Bishop, but those records are still there at Paul Quinn College, and any alum of Bishop is still accepted by Paul Quinn College. So yes, they have those records as well as what took place. The other pastors that were there at the other 12 pastors that were there, part of that secret meeting, and who were the pastors at that time, who were the ones that were able to attend. and why. And they told Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, they said, we don't have those issues here in Dallas. The white people here are good to us, and they promised us some things. Don't worry about it. That's why you hear about everything that was going on in all the other places, but not Dallas. I yield the mic. I can discuss more, but I know I don't want to keep everybody's time. I know everybody wants to start their weekend and get it kicking off and all that stuff. So, but yeah, there's a lot of nuggets that I want to drop just in case, something happened to me. Y'all have all that information. I yield the mic.
Well, can you come back on Monday? Finish up.
Oh, I'd be delighted, sir. I'm getting more free time. Like I say, the track season is winding down. We got nationals on next Thursday through Saturday. So between that and then the assignment that I've been put on by Brother No Sellout, aka Sir Jinx a lot. I appreciate that. But No Sellout, I know you're in there somewhere in the background. So I appreciate you. But so between those two, that's why I've been kind of, in and out. So things are starting to wind down a little bit. And yes, sir, I'd be more than happy to come back and share.
All right. So y'all heard it. Monday Rising. We're going to get it in. We're going to do part 3.
David Corey said, hell no, come back tomorrow. Matter of fact, come back tonight.
Matter of fact, don't even leave right now.
Well, people got responsibilities, so as much as we love what we do, gotta get to handling business. Wow.
Been one of them risings. That's all I can say.
Confound you, Oak Cliff Tiff. I wasn't even gonna say the name. SM Wright. You know it. Got that freeway named after him. I yield the mic.
Small world. Small world. All right. My head is hurting. Diane Judith Nash, DJN. Oh boy. So that's gonna be it for this Friday Rising. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Before we head on out, no sellout. Is there anything that you would like to share or add about what has been discussed this rising?
First of all, I appreciate you for letting me go before James closes.
Hey, I got a vouch for him. He tried yesterday too.
I couldn't. Yeah. I had to retrace my steps to get back to where it was. But yeah, no. Appreciate everybody all week for showing up. Obviously, if you have any questions, you can contact us 24 hours a day. Assembly@gmail.com. Links in the chat. Peace, y'all.
James Flames. Choctaw Jimmy. Bless us with some more stuff before you head on out, bro. Floor is yours. I relinquish the mic.
I'll say what I always say. I've waited 15 years for this time. I appreciate you brothers on the panel. I appreciate Holy Man. I know he's listening. You probably can't chime in right now. Lady Free, I appreciate you. Those in the chat. I don't know if Pamela Hall passed. I don't know if she's out there in her gardener yet or not, but I definitely appreciate her. Those y'all in the chat, I don't want to mention everybody's name because I'll leave somebody out. But I have waited 15 years. So now what I'm about to do, I think I'm about to go to Reunion Tower. If y'all don't know what that is, that's that big ball that you see when you see the Dallas skyline. I think I'm gonna get on the top of that and just dance a jig, because I've been waiting, woo, for this time. I yield this cotton picking mic. Enjoy your weekend.
As always, James, we appreciate you, bro. Can't put a price on the information that you bring, the perspective and the credibility that you bring. The individuals that can vouch for you is immeasurable. You are a real person. Your reputation of good deeds precedes you. People know you. You're doing work in your community, so thank you for that. I'm sure the community thank you. That's the reason why they're trying to get you to run for mayor. But I digress. Here in the Talk to This Assembly, our job is to make sure we help those that wish to not only explore and find out their family tree, but tie into whatever tribe they belong to. I got the dough. For those that wish to tie into their family tree and help their community, their families, relatives, and tribes become self-sufficient so that they don't need to be leaning on any governmental assistance. This is for anybody and everybody that chooses to do this, regardless of what your ideology is or what tribe you think or feel you belong to. We are not here to tell you who you are, and we're not here to tell you who you're not. Our concern is not what goes on in your private life. We're really concerned with helping you find your tribe and tying in and staying on code. With that, I turn it over to Bones so he can address y'all, great people, and close it out. Bones, it's all yours.
Like to say again, thanks everybody on the panel. Thanks Brother James for coming in and always bringing his insight. Thank the chat for showing up every rising, and not only showing up, being active and keeping us accountable for the information that we present every rising. And on that note, it has been a very, very, very grateful rising with the relatives. Looking forward to starting off next week the same way. And until then, everybody have a blissful day. And who knows, we might be back this weekend or this evening, you never know. But until then, peace.
Peace, y'all.